Hello everyone, you're listening to Lipstick and Leather, and I am here with none other than Mr. Stevie Rachelle. How's it going today?
Hey man, it's all good. We just been kind of putting on some mileage, in the last day and a half.
Very excited to be here and very excited for your set tomorrow night.
I am too. I mean, we haven't played Minnesota probably more than once or twice in like the last 20 years. I mean, between 89 and the mid-90s, we were here like every year, sometimes twice a year. But, since the band ended at the end of 95, and then since we relaunched, we've ended up in Wisconsin a lot because that's where I'm from.
Mm-hmm, yes.
Chicago, Ohio, Detroit, Pittsburgh, the center there. But, there's been a few times when I was offered a show to play in Minnesota or Minneapolis, but it's not always like, hey, you don't play our city, are you avoiding us? It's like you have to consider not just routing on our end of it, but if we're playing in Chicago on a Friday and Green Bay on a Saturday, or Milwaukee on a Saturday, does Minneapolis really want a show on a Sunday, or if they want it on a Thursday? And there's been times where we could do it Thursday, but that's the same night as Poison and Firehouse, so it's, well, we're fucking not playing that night, Are we live on the radio? I guess I shouldn't drop any F-bombs. Okay. So, is it picking up okay?
Yeah, it's picking up great.
So, and you can chop in it. Yeah, so, the whole thing is, it all depends on who's playing where. Is the promoter just like, hey, I just did 3 club shows back to back to back last weekend, it's just not a good week for me. If it was next month, it'd be great. So it's also, an opportunity of when it works for, what date and who, where, why, and when. It's not just the band going we like Minnesota, we don't like Minnesota. Getting to Seattle, which we've never played, is not easy to go to because you have to go all the way up there, and then are you coming back? Are you hitting Portland? And then you get into the Idaho, Montana, North and South Dakotas. There's not a lot in there, So the West Coast is harder to travel. In the middle states, Colorado, Nebraska. I mean, there's only 1 or 2 cities in each. When you get into the Midwest, I could play in Ohio, Pittsburgh, Columbus, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Akron, Indianapolis, Detroit, Erie. They're all within about 3 hours of each other. There's 8 cities in 3 or 4 states. So
Tales from the Porno was an amazing CD, a very great throwback 80s CD that sounds, production-wise, amazing. Now you had some co-writes on there also. Mm-hmm. Would there be another Tales from the Porn CD?
As a matter of fact, I'm going there in about a month and a half. We're going to play 4 shows in various cities around Brazil. The guys actually told me they have a new song or 2 they've been working on, which they're excited to show me. And I guess whether we work on it or screw around with it there, I don't know. But they want to show me some new ideas. When they originally approached me, which was in, I want to say 2014, they sent me a message and basically said something to the effect of, we want to do what Shameless did, only in Brazil. We know you play with the guys in Germany. You go over there. You've made some records with them. So they said, are you interested? I said, sure, but let me hear what you have. Who are you? What's your deal? What bands were you in? And in today's modern world of technology, we're in this band. Here we are on YouTube. Here's our old CD. You can find it on iTunes. Here's this, a live show we did with this band. And I was in this band and this guy was in that band. So it's I kind of could see who their old bands were and if they were good or bad or professional. And they were great guys. They seemed like good guys. And they sent me a couple of tracks, which I really liked. As a matter of fact, the first tune they ever sent me was the Back to the 80s song. But it wasn't called Back to the 80s. It was called, Ferris's Teacher. So the guy, Andy, the main guy, is really into the 80s. And he likes Ferris Bueller's Day Off and, Fast Times at Ridgemont High and all that. So, I'm what is this Ferris's Teacher thing? I think it was something to do with the movie, when the kid skipped school and was in his dad's. And at some point I'm listening to it and I just said, I can make this better. Let me rewrite the lyric and the melody, the vocals, over the existing music. And at one point they're like, no, we kind of like what we have. And I'm like, no. I go, I'll make you a deal. I'm going to charge you this much to sing it. I'm going to change it, though. I'm going to do it my way. If you don't like what I do, I'll sing it for free your way. And they're like, okay. So they paid me. I did it. I wrote this idea called Back to the 80s. And I knew they were about the 80s. I knew they loved the Sunset Strip and Hollywood and all those kind of bands, Doc and Motley, Rat, Skid Row. And I sent it back to them. They were like, oh my God, this is fucking amazing. And I'm like, So I'm not doing it for free. And that's kind of how some of the songs went. There was some they sent me and I totally changed them. Then at one point I said, don't send me any of your idea. Music only. No lyric, no melody, no vocal. I want to just go from scratch and not have any influence in my head. And so the title track, Tales from the Porn, technically it's not the title track, but it's the name of the band.
Right.
That song they sent me and they said, we want it to be called Tales from the Porn. You write the idea. And so then I wrote the idea about us, as a band. I had never met them, though. I never met them. I never even talked to them. I never Skyped with them. No phone calls. It was just Facebook or... Unbelievable. Let's turn that off. We basically... I was talking... so they sent... We want the song to be called Tales from the Porn. And I'm like, okay, I get it. I know what the idea is. Kind of the thought process that Tough had in 87, 88. It's us four against the world. Fuck everybody. Don't fuck with us. We're better than you. We'll fuck your girlfriends. We'll fucking kick your ass, And at one point, I'm listening to this music and it started with... Hey, motherfucker, you motherfucker, we motherfucker make noise since born. Hey, motherfucker, you motherfucker, we motherfucker, Tales from the Porn. And then I wrote this whole thing about us, we're gonna give you a show like we're rocking at the Whiskey a Go, 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 and I'm like, and I knew that they were gonna dig on that, so it was like, that was from scratch, like they had never heard anything, until I literally sent it back to them finished. And then said, hey, add some gang vocals or whatever, which they did. And same thing with Hot Girls, Fast Cars, I wrote that one. Let It Shake, which is kind of a Cinderella kind of sounding song. And at one point, I'm hearing Cinderella heavy, and I'm thinking, Shake Me. Then I was going to call it the Philly Shake, which is where Cinderella's from. Yes. But I thought, well, it's not Cinderella, but I like the word shake in there. And at one point, that's a song I wrote and sent to them. The one song that I really didn't do anything to and only did a few minor lyric tweaks was Perfect Love. They sent it to me, and I thought, it was really well done. Even the way Andy's solo came in, it was really well crafted and put together. And I'm like, you know what? There's not really much I would change on this. And I only changed a couple words, and turned out to be the first video single. And, I mean, it's great.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, it turned out really good.
And Danger Zone's such a tough song to sing and play and everything. How do you guys decide to do that?
Well, again, even Perfect Love's kind of a little higher and out of my range because I'm a little bit deeper, growly, Alice Cooper kind of voice. And he said, we want to do a cover song. Then they picked a couple, and at one point they sent me that one. And I was like, guys, really? Highway to the Danger Zone. That's up there, And I'm like, I don't know if I could pull it off. But I agreed to do it, and then I thought, well, at least in the studio I can take my time and cut vocal lines. But I really took that, not that I didn't take the other sessions seriously, because I usually did one song a day. But the few weeks leading up to knowing I was going to sing that song, I was doing some vocal exercises. I was singing along to it on YouTube. I was kind of like, this is not going to be easy. So I had to be in a good state of mind as far as my voice being in good shape. But, I went in and with a few hours, I knocked it out and it turned out good. So, and there's no slowing down the tape. Like in the old days, they could literally slow the tape a little bit and then you don't have to sing as high. Then they put it back up to normal speed and it makes your voice automatically higher.
Because you recorded your parts separately. You recorded your parts in LA while they recorded their parts in Brazil.
They did all the music. Sent me the tracks, then I did all my lead vocal and harmony vocals, a lot of those harmonies, those layered harmonies on the end of Perfect Love. That's me, and I'm kind of proud of that because I'm not really a harmony singer. Some guys are rhythm guitar or lead guitar player, but they can sing really good harmony parts, and, well, let me try a fifth or a seventh, and they know all these keys and octaves, and I'm not that guy. I'm just a lead, rock and roll, fuck you, rock and roll singer. So when it comes to well, let's do, all this kind of layering stuff, that is not me. But I spent some time and I came up with some ideas and with some direction from Adam Hamilton, who produced all the vocals with me. He and I cut all the vocals then in LA. And then I would send them back the tracks. And then certain things I'd say hey, I hear some doubling here or some background vocals here. And then they would have a couple of guys do it there, including Igor, the keyboard player, Igor Godori.
Right.
He's a great singer. Half my age. He's like 25, the youngest guy. But he's also a multi-instrumentalist where he can play keyboards, he can sing all the stuff. In Perfect Love, he actually helps me live. There's a few parts in that chorus where the lines are really high, plus they kind of overlap. So it's like I sing the first line, he sings the part of the second line, I sing the third line, he sings the part of the fourth line, then we double the fifth line, you know? And then he also plays live. There's a song where he plays rhythm guitar, and Bento, the bassist, plays slide guitar, and then Bruno, the rhythm guitarist, plays bass guitar. So there's a few guys in that band that are interchangeable, and they're like switching instruments. And then Andy's son is the lead guitarist.
Right. Now, did your bands Talon or Exciter ever record any originals?
There's 2 demos out there.
Nice.
Not many people have them. As a matter of fact, Mike Schneider, the original bassist from Exciter, he's been busting my balls for a while because we have a lot of photos, and we have 7 songs demoed from Exciter and Talon. There's 3 or 4 from Exciter, and then there's 3 or 4 from Talon, one or the other. But and so yeah, making that CD has been something that's been on the back burner and in my mind for a long time. I mean, not that there's a huge demand for it, but there is some diehards, and Mike's been like, dude, we got to do a CD, you know. So at some point that just might happen, you know.
Now, yourself being friends with the Firehouse guys, have you ever chatted with them about singing background vocals on the White Heat demos? Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I messaged CJ recently because I started doing the Tough Diaries.
Yes.
Did you read any of those?
I did, yes.
Okay, so now I'm coming up in, like, I'm just finished 88, and I talked about going down and singing some backgrounds on those. And I was asking CJ, I messaged him, like, when did you guys come here to record that? Do you remember? And he was giving me some information as to when, because they weren't called Firehouse, they were called White Heat, and they were just demoing, and Dana was producing with Mark Slaughter. Yeah. And so I called him and asked him about that, you know, and then, like, occasionally if I run into a real diehard Firehouse fan, I'll go, hey, I got some trivia for you. You didn't know this. Because I didn't even know who they were. Beth Nussbaum from Rock Scene Magazine called me and just said, hey, can you come down and sing some backgrounds on this band's demo? And they were a band from Firehouse that Dana was producing. So I went there. That was done at Cherokee Studios, where Motley Crue recorded Shout at the Devil.
Okay, yeah.
And that night that Dana told us, Motley Crue recorded Shout at the Devil on this mixing board. And I was like, oh my God, you know, like, Looks Like Kill was like recorded on this. It was kind of, you know, for me, it was kind of a cool thing,
cool.
You know.
Awesome. Now, obviously, you managed Veins of Jenna. Now, they did the Rat and Poison tour. Now, Mike Tramp's White Line was supposed to originally open, but Veins of Jenna wound up getting the gig. How did that change?
I'll tell you what happened. Poison was the headliner, and Rat was the support, and White Lion was the opener. And what happened is that's when Mike Tramp at some point was like going out as Mike Tramp. Then he was going out as Mike Tramp's White Lion, or White Lion featuring Mike Tramp. And then Vito Brato had not been seen or heard for years, like he never did interviews, or when people did hear anything, it was like him and Mike were kind of pissed at each other or something. And I guess it got to a point where, as big as that tour was going to be, Poison, Rat, and White Lion, or even White Lion featuring Mike Tramp, or whatever use of the name, I guess it got to a point where Vito had more control over the branding of that name, because I think that was his band and he hired Mike, right? Because Mike was from like Denmark or something, and played in some other bands. Yeah. And then they kind of brought him in, kind of like LA Guns brought Phil Lewis in from England. So I think Vito was more controlling, or had more control, because he started White Lion. And at some point when they were getting those bigger tours, this is already 10 or 11 years ago, I guess it got to a point where, hey, stop it or else. And then some lawyers got involved, and the lawyers got a hold of Live Nation and a hold of the management and the agency for Poison, and basically said, hey, A, B, and C, and if you help facilitate this, then you're going to be involved as well. So they were basically given a word of fair warning, like, you're going to end up getting sued if you allow them to be on the tour. So I think at that point, Live Nation, APA and Troy Blakely and Poison and the management all went, you know what, we'd love to have you, Mike, but this might be a bunch of shit that we don't want to deal with, so sorry, you got to go. Now, at that time, I was managing Veins of Jenna. I had already kind of reached out. Well, I did. I cold called Bobby Dahl through a friend. And I heard about that tour, and I wanted to try to get Veins of Jenna on that tour. So I called a friend of a friend of a friend and said, hey, I want to get a hold of Bobby Dahl. And they're like, for what? I'm like, I want to try to get my band somehow involved in this summer tour. Mm-hmm. And then at some point, somebody called me and said, hey, Bobby's going to call you. I was like, okay. And then he called me like 10 minutes later, and he was like, Stevie Rachelle, Bobby Dahl, what's up? And I hadn't talked to him in a long time, and he owed me no favors, but I was like, hey, this and that, blah, blah, blah. I'm managing this band. They're signed to the guy from Jackass's label, Bam Margera. Right. And then Bobby was like, well, if I help you somehow get involved, like, what are you going to do for me? And I was like, what can I do for you? Nothing. You sold 20 million records. I sold 100,000, like you went platinum. I didn't. You became a millionaire. I didn't, like, what can I do, Bobby? He's like, well, you know what I mean. And I'm like, he's like, can you get me Bam Margera? And I'm like, listen, if they get on the tour, he'll be at some shows. I can promise that. Yeah. And so we went back and forth. And at one point, when they did those summer tours, Live Nation would have like a side stage in the parking lot at select shows. And they'd have like a local band open play, or maybe they have, not Faster Pussycat, but maybe Enough's Enough, or like some lower level kind of D-list hair band kind of play, and then a couple local bands would win like a battle of the bands at their radio station and open up the Poison show, in the parking lot. So there was like 35 or 40 shows, and like 15 or 20 of them had the parking lot thing. So Veins of Jenna, I negotiated for them to be on the parking lot stage, and they were. And it was already being organized that we were going to go on the tour. But we were going to be one of those bands playing in the parking lot as all the people walked in. And then in between, like, we'd play 2 shows with Poison and Rat on that tour. Unbelievable. We were going to play like 2 or 3 shows in a week on that. And then we'd have like 4 days off. So then they'd play like a couple club shows. Mm-hmm. And what happened is it got closer, like the White Lion stuff came to be, and at some point I sent a message to Bobby, and I just said, hey man, what's this I'm hearing about White Lion? Like somebody said they're going to get kicked off. And then at one point he's like, there's some issues, this and that. And it was only like 10 or 11 days away, and then it was official, they were kicked off the tour. So I blew up Bobby's phone. I'm like, dude, you got to put us on the main stage. He's like, oh, we might take this and this and this. And I said, listen, if you take a Firehouse or an LA Guns or a Faster, no disrespect to them, but they're not going to bring any more people. And the reality is, neither is Veins of Jenna. Nobody else is going to make a difference. People are coming to see Poison and Rat, and whoever else is on there is getting lucky. I said, give these kids a chance. They're 4 early 20-somethings with a dream. Gilby produced their demos. Bam signed them. People love them. Let's make it happen. So it was me basically just begging Bobby Dahl, but when we were so late in the game, the tour was going to start in like 10 or 11 days. And at some point, I think they were trying to get some label to buy a band on. Like, hey, here's a spot for you to put your band on, but you got to pay X amount of money. And, that we're signed to an indie label, which we were signed to an indie label, but Bam wasn't going to pay anything. But he also had a little different appeal with them. They were this new wave of Swedish sleaze, and Bam at that time was a pretty big deal. Mm-hmm. Jackass was huge, Viva La Bam, all those shows, and he was voted like one of the top 30 most influential young men in America, and not just music, but in culture and entertainment, and there was all reality stuff going on. So I think they looked at it as like, if we get Bam Margera's little baby band on there, maybe we can move some interest and put the vehicle into a different interest of people, not just the 80s hair band people that are like, let's go watch Poison like we used to. Now it'd be like, hey, maybe some skater kids might go because they think Bam's going to show up, which he did a few nights. So in a nutshell, my cold call worked, but it took a couple of weeks of tweaking and back and forth, and eventually it happened, and they were on it. They played the main stage for 37 shows.
Absolutely. Now, Jesse Forte at one point was supposed to be in Lynch Mob. I mean, what's he up to these days?
I have no idea. And I kind of helped Jesse get that almost in Lynch Mob gig, because what happened is Oni had quit. Robbie Crane called me from the airport. Him and George and whoever was like on their way to a show, and then Oni kind of was at a, if this and this and this doesn't happen, then I'm not going. And I guess he never did. So then they were calling me and said, who do you know that can come out and sing? And I said, get Chaz West, who had done, I think he'd done some shows with them before. Yeah. He's got a great kind of bluesy vibe, great voice. He's a pro. And they ended up, they did get Chaz, and he went out for part of it. But at some point I said to Robbie, I said, you should have George look at Jesse Forte, the guy that sings in Veins of Jenna. And at that point, Veins of Jenna was about to end anyways. Their visa was up. They were going to go home. Jesse didn't have a Swedish visa. He was from America. And at some point, George heard him sing a little bit and saw some photos. And Jesse's kind of got that kind of eclectic Indian mix kind of ethnicity vibe, and a little hippie-ish, and kind of like Oni kind of in a vibe, just like something a little different. He wasn't just your prototypical long-haired rocker kid. And he also had a real soulful voice. George loved him. He was like, dude, that guy's great. So at some point, I did put the two pieces together, and they did work together a little bit and rehearsed and jammed on some ideas. But just as it seemed like it was about to come to fruition, because George announced him as the singer at NAMM of 2011 or something like that, then all of a sudden a month later, Oni and him made up, and then it was back to their little setup with the main guy. But then obviously Oni left again like a year ago or something.
Now you were in talks to manage Crash Diet around the Simon Cruise times.
I wasn't in talks to manage them, but I was going to co-manage. We were basically going to merge Michael Sundin. Michael Sundin was managing Crash Diet. He was from Sweden, or he was maybe originally from England, but his wife was from Sweden, and then he moved there, if I'm getting this right. So he was managing Crash Diet, and I was managing Veins of Jenna. And he was trying to get Crash Diet to come to America and break in a little bit more. And obviously I had those guys here for a few years already. And it's weird, even though Veins of Jenna was from Sweden, they'd only played a couple shows in Sweden. And they played like 150 in the States. So it was like, let's work together and kind of co-manage, coexist with both of our companies. You in Sweden, me here, Crash Diet there, Veins of Jenna here. And let's kind of do this with them, put some shows together here, put some shows together there. And that was just something that just kind of was starting to implement itself, like with emails. And then I went to their show and they played at the Whiskey, and we hung out, and we were talking about the idea of how we could help each other. I could help him here and he could help me there. And then at some point he was on tour with them, kind of like I was with Veins of Jenna, dying for my band, essentially, but I didn't die, and that's what Michael did. And he played Rock City in Nottingham and fell down the stairs, and I've been in that place, and I went down those stairs, and it's a crazy kind of thing because it's kind of dark, and it's eerie, and it's like a lot of those clubs in Europe have like bomb cellars or basements or bomb shelters underneath, and it was just this long dark staircase. And I guess during the show he had went to go to the downstairs dressing rooms or something, which is where they were, and at some point he tripped and fell down like a huge flight of staircase, hit his head, and the band was playing, and then at some point I think a roadie or something found him, called the ambulance, went in the hospital, and then a few days later he passed away. Oof. Crazy. Just a freak accident.
Absolutely. Now, there's always been kind of sort of a rivalry between the thrash bands and the glam bands or whatever. Now you're good friends with Jason Newsted. How did you meet Jason and become his friend?
Well, I wasn't per se good friends with him, but there was a point when Todd, or more so George and Michael, because Jason was from Phoenix, which is where Flotsam and Jetsam was from. Yes. That's also where Tough is from. Previous to Tough even forming, and previous to Jason even forming Flotsam and Jetsam, at one point George and Jason were in this premature variation of a metal band called Metal Beast. Okay. So I'm guessing this had to be like 82, 83, and they're just jamming, in the basement, in a garage with a couple of different guys. And so then at some point Jason formed his thrash band called Flotsam and Jetsam, and then Todd and George formed Tough on like New Year's Eve of 84 into 85. That's when they formed it. And Todd and George also were a little bit more metal. Like Todd's older brother is Kenny Chason from Keel, and his other brother is Greg Chason, who was from Badlands, and previous to that I believe he was in Surgical Steel. And now Phoenix also had a big metal scene. Rob Halford lived there. Sacred Reich is from there. Flotsam and Jetsam is from there. A lot of metal guys. And Todd loved heavy metal. He loved Iron Maiden and Priest, and so did George. So those guys in their bands, even before Tough, I actually have some press shots I've never put out of those guys, like in the full like Defenders of the Faith looking Judas Priest metal stuff. But then they saw like some of the bands like Motley and Poison, or not Motley, but not Poison, but Motley and Rat come out and had more of a fashion kind of vibe, like look a little cooler, put a little bleach in your hair, and suddenly the girls quadrupled at the show. And so they started calling it party rock or pussy rock, and they started playing more glammy kind of stuff and getting way more girls and way more attention. So they were both kind of riff guys and metal guys, which you kind of hear that in some of the playing, Lonely Lucy and some of those songs. They're way more riffy guitar, Ain't Worth a Dime, Good Guys Wear Black. Those are more metalish kind of. Right. They're a little bit more metal sounding, not just bar chords, And so, but they kind of transcended themselves into being this pop glam band. And Jason was still their friend, though. And he was in this dark thrash Flotsam. So then over years, Tough moved to LA. Jason got the gig in Metallica. And so then I joined Tough. And whenever Metallica played, Jason would invite us. We'd come to the hotel. We'd go to the shows. He'd give us passes. Me and George went to the studio when they were recording Black. The Black Album. Lars wasn't there, or James, but Jason was there. He was doing some stuff. There was like a engineer too, and it was kind of weird because he would also come to some of our shows when we were at our glamous peak, and he'd come and hang out on the bus, come backstage, and I always go, Jason, come up and play with us, and he'd be like, nah, you look like a girl, Stevie, So, but he was always really cool to us. He'd come to our apartment, the Tough Muff Mansion, and hang out with us. So there was still their friendship from years earlier.
Right on. Now, before revealing you were in charge of Metal Sledge, did any of your rocker peers know all along?
No, nobody of noteworthy mention. A couple of guys that were in some bands, smaller bands, and some friends knew, but nobody from any band that people would really know.
So you'd just be backstage time to time, hovering and getting the dirt, I guess.
Yeah, but more no. I mean, a lot of the dirt just came in through channels that at some point when we set up those emails and the site 20 years ago, social networks were new. There wasn't any. I mean, there wasn't no Twitter, there was no Facebook, there was none of that. So, but at one point when people got emails, and then they learned that they could make up an email like Joe124 at earthlink.net or something, they could just send us a message and say, hey, I went to the show and this happened, but I don't want my name to be attached to it, or my name is Fuckface Von Vanstein or whatever. They'd kind of use a moniker like we would. So those kind of things, little by little, the tips just dribbled in, and at some point we had to kind of sort like what was real from fake. But sometimes we'd get multiple emails from one show or one incident that happened, and we'd be like, okay, well, this seems more realistic now that multiple people are saying it,
Mm-hmm. What made you decide that you were one of the two people involved in Metal Sledge?
Just because it was so long. I mean, it was almost 6 years. It was hard doing it and concealing it, because now social networks were starting to pop up, MySpace, YouTube, and it's just things were more in the open, and the site was getting bigger. There was money being made. It was just harder and harder to hide, and people were also digging for a long time, like who's doing it. So we were also being, it was kind of like we were, FBI's Most Wanted. We knew people were trying to find out who we were, but we were still trying to hide. Right. So at one point I was like, listen, I can't do this any longer. It's just getting too stressful. I just want to be like, hey, it's me, and if you like it, cool. If not, fuck off.
Fair enough. Now, having talked to Bret Michaels in recent years and kind of making up, any chances of maybe a 20 questions with Bret Michaels?
I did run into Bret. We actually saw each other a few times. We had a great one-on-one chat, and then I saw him at the Hair Nation thing that he played at, and we chatted there. 20 questions is kind of an old thing for Metal Sledge. Mm-hmm. We did it 500 times with hundreds of rock stars. If anything, I've been given information from Bret via his guitarist. Pete's fed me like some tips once in a while and told me about releases that Bret's done. They've given me a couple little exclusive tidbits. So, but doing an old school like, hey, what groupie has the biggest tits? Like those kind of questions, they don't work today the way they worked 20 years ago. You know, us exposing people with their old photos or doing those kind of sarcastic, tongue-in-cheek, always setting the guy up to say something that no matter what he says, he either is going to be a dick to somebody or he's going to be a sissy to the reader. It's not the same, you know, especially after cyberbullying with Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and so many things out there. So many similar kind of things, people doing other pranks. For us to do it, it's got to be done a little bit more with a different approach.
Now, Tough are one of the few bands who don't charge fans to meet them. What are your thoughts on paid meet and greets? I know after the shows you always have tons of merch and you sell tons of merch because you guys will get photos for free, right. You'll sell merch for free, you'll sign stuff, you don't have a problem with limits.
Right.
What do you think about the paid meet and greets?
I think it's a 50-50 thing. I think certain bands, it's worth it. Or I think it's notable. I mean, Gene Simmons, Nikki Sixx, Eddie Van Halen, you know, there's certain guys that they're very, very famous. They're very rich. Their time is very valuable. You know, and I've even tried to say and equate it to a fan like this. If Tough plays a show, last night, we played in Green Bay. Less than 100 people. There was like 80-some people. But let's say there was 100 people there. When I got down on stage, if I spoke to each fan for 1 minute and took 2 photos and signed 2 autographs, it would take about 2 hours. You know? And there's some fans that come up and go, hey man, I really like to tell you that you're awesome. Here's $20. I want a shirt. Thank you very much. Can you sign it? Thank you, thank you, thank you. Awesome. Boom, 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 selfie, and they're gone. Then there's some people that go, hey dude, so listen man, do you remember that one time I was at a party in 1988 and you were wearing a red vest? And it's just like, okay, like you're going to tell me I don't remember that. I'm sorry, you know? So at some point, there's not a lot of time to do that to everybody, especially even for the smallest band like Tough. However, I don't think I'm worth somebody paying $150 to shake my hand. So I'll gladly take a picture, but buy a shirt, buy a CD. But a guy like Gene Simmons, he's worth $300 million.
That makes sense.
He's one of the most famous musicians, one of the most influential musicians. He's essentially a living icon in music. He can't walk out of a hotel and take a picture with fucking 600 or 400 Kiss Army fans standing there. He just can't. And when he plays an arena and there's 10,000, or a stadium when there's 30,000, or a festival when there's 100,000, can't do it. So if you want to meet Gene and Paul, you got to pay $1,000. You get to walk in, take a picture of them next to them in their costume. You get a little goodie bag. You get a fine thing. You get a laminate. You get a mixed CD of some. That's what you pay for. And if you don't want to pay, you don't have to. But I think the Tough, it's not worth it. You know, I think some guys are. I mean, Sebastian Bach, I don't see eye to eye with everything he's done, but he's a big enough celebrity that if you want to meet Sebastian for a few minutes on his bus, which I've seen the videos, he lets people come on the bus, he signs posters, takes some pictures, signs a few things. There's 2 or 3 minutes he gives those people, and it's a couple $100, but he's a big star. He can't do that with 1,000 people that all stood in Thunder, Ontario Bay to watch him play at the theater. I mean, is that about how many people come to see him?
Yeah.
He can't do it, you know. But for 20 of them that want to pay $150 or $200 or $100, and they can walk him on the bus and spend 2-3 minutes, sign a couple things. Hey, I met you when I was 15. Thanks a lot. I still love your band or your music. It's valuable for them, and I think it's okay for him to charge it. But a D-list band, or E-list, or F-list, or Z-list.
Are Bullet Boys charging for a meet and greet these days?
I think they are.
$100.
I think that's overdoing it. But all respect to Mark, but I don't think they carry enough weight to charge fans for a meet and greet. That's my 2 cents.
Now there was talks of you to record a song called "Shagadoo to Lollipop." Will it be recorded or?
Have you ever heard it?
No, I wish.
Maybe I'll play it for you.
I'd love that.
I've had this done for a very long time. I don't know if it's in this phone, though. It's really cool. But basically the song is done. There's a mixed mastered version of the full record. It's a record for my third solo CD. And what it is it's a combination of songs from the first record, like 7 or 8 from the first record, like 5 or 6 from the second record, and then like 3 or 4 new songs that no one's ever heard. And that's basically mixed and mastered, and the art idea is basically almost done. But I need to go into production and make it.
Now, you auditioned for Rat. How'd that go?
I went and played like 4 or 5 songs with them. It was Blotzer, DeMartini, Crane, and Kerry Kelly, and it was in a studio. And their like management was there, and like they filmed it and recorded it, and other guys did too. Like Mike Tramp did, I think.
Really?
Jizzy Pearl did.
I knew Jizzy did.
Robert Mason did. Ralph did.
Right.
Before they were called Steel Panther, they were still called Metal School at the time. Yeah, I went down there and sang with them.
So you sang a couple of new, like current tracks with them, and a couple older tracks.
I sang the Over the Edge song, which was that's cool. We did Walking the Dog. Then we did like either Lay It Down or You're in Love, and then we did Slip of the Lip, which is real tricky and kind of high and a lot of fast lyrics. And I was kind of out of the rock and roll vibe, though. I hadn't played too much heavy metal or hard rock in a long time. I was doing the Cheesehead thing for several years, and I was doing my first solo CD, because Tough ended in 95, and that was in 2000. So that was kind of one of my kind of little influences to re-fire up the rock and roll energy, because I really had fun doing that, even just going down for the couple of, an hour or whatever.
God, I'd love to see a video of that.
Yeah, I don't have it. I'm sure they have it in their lock and key somewhere, because I think they taped everybody.
Now, being good friends with Mr. Jim Gillette, what's happening with the new Nitro CD? They did a pledge thing, and I guess it got canceled.
It just didn't go as where they wanted it to. I still talk to Jim. He's doing great. His kids are doing great. They're wrestling, MMA, training.
Cool. Well, hopefully it comes out. So
right.
They got Chris Adler on the CD.
Yeah, I mean, they did some tracks, and he actually played me a few tracks, which it sounded amazing. It sounded modern, but it also sounded a little bit Nitro-esque with some real kind of tricky, fast, crazy guitars and screams, but also heavy and modern and really well produced. Like it sounded like Five Finger Death Punch, meets Lamb of God, meets old Pantera, really, really good.
Curious if he still hit some of the highs.
He can.
Really?
He can.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
I was kind of shocked when I heard some of it. I was like, holy shit,
Well, that's all I have, Stevie.
Okay.
I appreciate the interview. That was a lot of fun.
Hopefully it's still going.